Welcome to Cut Daisies and Unicorns, and here we are. This is Season 9, Episode number 8.
The episode of Infinity.
Yes.
This episode will always go on. And we started at minute 8.
We did.
Of our
recording.
Pre-recording.
Yeah.
So, episode 8, pre-recorded, and feeling great about it right now. So,
yeah,
we're giving you all the eyes at the center camera. If you're listening online,
all the eyes.
At the podcast, you don't get to see.
You just get to hear
The greens
not
and the
see.
blues. Yeah. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so it's quite a day for episode number 8 of Season 9.
Why so?
I don't know. Because it's rainy, and apparently we had tornadoes yesterday.
Yeah.
But as far as I know, no touchdowns in the city. There rarely ever is. I think it's something
cool,
to do with like
The heat of
buildings
the
and heat. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but tornadoes usually stay away from areas like this. So,
Yeah, it's true. It's true. They follow a funnel.
Yeah.
Or their funnels go, our funnels in a different direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's some other intricate science that has to do with tornadoes and why, major metropolitan cities don't usually see them. But
you know who would know?
who?
Matt Handley.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So this is early enough in the podcast. He won't be.
He won't be sleeping yet.
Not yet.
All right, good.
No.
So Matt, let us know.
Which, by the way, he sent me a text and telling me that I need to see This Is Spinal Tap.
Oh, you do. It is good.
I was like, oh man. Yeah, I got like 2 texts from people who are like, they're far enough behind in listening to the series that like they're bringing up stuff that we talked about, like, and I'm like, I don't remember talking about it.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, when did this happen? I'm like, I don't even know what you're saying.
That was the nothing.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
but
So it wasn't the chaos, it was the nothing.
yeah.
That's when we started talking about what are those?
Yeah.
Movies, right? That cult classics. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I mean, as soon as, like, when it came back, like,
Yeah.
I refreshed my memory, but, like, when people are talking about things that are, well, I mean,
Me too.
so many episodes ago,
Right.
right? I mean, I'm just like, what in the world? Somebody was, like, listening to episode 1 of season 9.
Oh.
And so
And
I'm
you're like, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
I think we conspiracy theories. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. But we did bring up at the last episode that we were going to do a deep dive into Deity.
Yeah.
I think that's the title.
Deep dive into Deity.
Yeah.
All right.
Diving deep into Deity.
It's
Yeah.
lots of D's.
Yep.
Lots of...
Stop.
Oh, man.
And so awkward silence. And we keep going on. Yeah. So in this episode, if you're just in that first 4 minutes and wondering if you should listen to what's going on, we won't tell you all the things that are going to go on, but part of the things that we're going to talk about is Deity,
Yeah.
God. We brought up, because we were dealing with, and by the way, based off of last episode, Hillary McBride is starting a new podcast, and she's been working on content for over 2 years.
Wow.
Can you imagine what it would be like for us to roll out a podcast after working on content for 2 years?
Wow. I don't know.
I mean, we make this shit up as we go.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, and she's, is it going to be geared towards her specialty of
So
traumas?
It has to deal with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and trauma held within the body, which I'm bringing back because of what you were talking about last episode.
Right.
She's convinced, and she's like got her doctorate in psychology and like is beyond the degree that you need to be able to practice, but she's convinced that all trauma is spiritual trauma. So saw that on Instagram, I think yesterday, and she was going to come out. So she's got a couple different podcasts out there. One of her podcasts, she has people, and they, like people that she sees and counsels, like give permission to have their topic brought to the forefront.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like that. Yeah, super interesting. So, but yeah, I listened to Hillary when she was hanging out with Science Mike and Michael Gungor and the liturgists, and then that thing kind of imploded. And
yeah, it did.
All of a sudden, now Michael Gungor, who walked away from the church, he walks back to the church so that he can make money with his, yeah. And the other person who's really stirring the pot right now, Derek Webb.
Oh, yeah.
That dude, holy cow.
Yeah.
Wow. And people are like, I don't even know. Well, so when I first started playing guitar, when I first heard the newest, in my life, the newest wave of contemporary Christian music, this is post Jesus People in California in the mid-'70s. So I don't know, it's probably somewhere between 93 and 95. And Mike is in his head, he's like, well, that's kind of when I was born. Yes, exactly, about 28 years ago. But one of the groups that I really, really enjoyed was Caedmon's Call. And Derek Webb was the lead singer in that formation of a band. And then he that group imploded or did whatever groups do when they're not playing anymore.
Yeah.
And then he did a solo album, and on that solo album is one of our favorite songs called Wedding Dress. Yeah, yeah. And like just brilliantly crafted and performed. And yeah, so if you want to do a little YouTube search for Derek Webb and solo album, but if you pop in Wedding Dress, Derek Webb Wedding Dress, you'll hear that.
Yeah.
And so I am a whore, I must confess. I put you on just like a wedding dress and go down the aisle. Yeah. So now, his most recent thing, in his deconstruction from faith, he's got a new, he calls it a new Christian album out. But it's the Jesus Hypothesis.
That's the name of it?
That's the name of the album. And people are receiving it with, like, it's one of two things. People either love it or people are just adamantly casting him into the depths of hell.
Oh, yeah. Outrage, as we...
Yeah.
And this is where we see the Christian love happen.
Oh, so much love. So then there is a transgender person in Nashville called Flamey Grant, which is a play on Amy Grant, which is, again, she's been lovingly married to Vince Gill for, I would guess, over 20-some years, but Amy's debacle within Christianity was that she got a divorce from her first husband.
Right.
And, but so now Flamey Grant is a drag queen. And when there was so much repealing of the bathrooms issue and stuff like that going on, then Derek Webb dove into the depths and wrote a song called Boys Will Be Girls, and had Flamey Grant take him through the process of transformation to become drag. And and basically he's just like, if you love people and there are people in your life that you love who are, going through this, then you need to stand up with them, not against them. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, the way I'm standing up is and he's married to a lady.
He was also in a Christian band.
What band is she in?
It's...
there's... Yeah.
Hold Fat, no.
Oh, man. So anyway, but, I mean, and she knew what she was getting into. That's hilarious. So we take this rabbit trail all the way down the line because... in our conversation about deity, we're gonna address a couple questions that have kind of been passed my way in regards to how do you define, or how do you look into this spirituality of life and name a God that is true God and true to you. And so Phil's quickly researching for the name of Derek Webb's wife.
Yeah, and this isn't right because they keep bringing up, I think, his ex-wife. And I don't know why they're bringing up.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We'll come across it at some point in time, but it is. Yeah, I mean, I think what you find is the how easily people are outraged.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like an age of outrage. Like everybody's got to be outraged over something. And particularly when we find outrage popping up and where we see it a lot, and maybe it's just because it's also on our radar a lot, is like out of the Christian communities. There's just a lot of people who are outraged over everything.
Yeah, and I think, maybe Psychology Today would give us some insight in this. But I think when it comes to anger is not a root emotion. I believe that anger is actually like a secondary emotion. As an artist, I think of the color wheel. You have primary colors, and based on primary colors, you can mix primary colors to make secondary colors. And I personally, Lord knows I've been through enough counseling. I believe I paid for this definition that anger is not a core emotion. Anger is a secondary emotion. There's always something underneath it. And you gotta, we've used the coined phrase, what's behind, or what's at the root, or there's something like, and so when somebody's popping off in outrage, really a great question to pose to yourself as you're listening to the outrage is, where's this coming from? Mm-hmm. What's behind door number angry? Right. Yeah. And so I don't have the answer to that. And I quite frankly don't. I don't think any time when someone's angry. Usually I feel like a turtle. I just want to take my arms and legs and my head inside my shell and
tuck it in.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of drags. All right. I do have some theories on outrage. I mean, and I think because it goes back to what we've talked about early on in the season.
Yeah.
Is that people who are finding themselves, caught up in conspiracy theories, and we looked at that as an early definition as even losing power and somehow not having control over it. And then they're trying to be able to grab control, or be able to espouse it to something else. Yeah. Right. So this is because of whatever. And so it's really easy then to be able to figure out, where is it that we're actually, like, so Christians used to have lots of power within the structure of society.
Yeah.
Right. And there was a lot of it.
Well,
There was systems at play. There were beliefs that people had. I mean, and everybody were like, oh, well, this is just natural. This is normal. And then all of a sudden, when that tide shift happened, I mean, and I would say that this was back in late 80s, 90s.
sure.
And this shift has been happening, and yet we've still been trying to grasp at all of these different ways in which we're like, no, like this can't happen. Like we have to, and then, you get phrases like we need to go back to, or we have to look back, and so we're always thinking back here is better. And it's like, was it better?
Well, it doesn't matter if it was.
Right.
Because where we are is in our present. Mm-hmm. I know people don't want to hear that, but it doesn't matter. It does not matter because we watched the wave of, and I love saying this word. This is a $10 word.
Oh, good.
Because we watched the wave of postmodernity move across Europe. And I remember specifically that in the conversation within evangelical churches, and I'm actually going to make up a new term.
Oh, good. I like new terms.
So I'm going to distinguish the difference between evangelicals and new evangelicals. Okay? And people are like, well, that's a real thing. Well, if it is, this is how not informed your guy is right now. Okay? I'm not informed that way. But what I would say is, when the Reformation happened and there was a separation between, for those who would walk out of the state church or Catholicism, we know Luther championed that effort. Well, then you've got the Puritans, and this strong line of Anabaptist, which were actually Baptists in their formation. Okay, so then that was the formation of evangelicalism. Well, I'm gonna say that there are groups of people who aren't even towing the line with evangelicalism, but I would classify them as new evangelicals. All right. So that being said, we get into all of this stuff, and we start looking at how in the world. Well, postmodernity is postmodernism. I mean, for people who have a hard time spitting that out. I remember reading about postmodernity and the move within the church, or the move within culture into postmodernity, back in the late 90s, and trying to wrap my head around it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I read and read and the concept, and how to put that together. And it was so not a part. But I take you back to a Kevin Bacon movie.
Footloose?
Yeah. But what was the church in the community during? I mean, that was being portrayed of, this is small town Hickville, wherever, but the pastor sat on the council of the town council,
right?
And the pastor was the voice. It didn't even look like there were other churches even in the town. It was like one
it was like Maine,
one church town,
right?
Which may actually indicate how small the town was. But that and I remember, it was even again 93, 95, 91, 97, right back in that time frame. I remember reading an article that was like, the shift has occurred right now. It used to be that a pastor of a church was the most trusted person in the town.
Right.
Now, at that time, pharmacist. The number one trusted individual in a town.
Was the pharmacist.
The pharmacist. And so all of a sudden, there is this move. Now, basically what we're calling out in this episode is that look around. The church is not the central influence or power.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and to me, I think that it did happen. And you look at the things that eroded, right? I mean, so we talk about church scandals, right? We talk about pastoral failures. You know, and that can include priests within the Catholic Church. I mean, the Catholic Church became a dominant news, story when there were multiple uncoverings of abuse within the Catholic Church by priests. And so when you see that, but it was almost like the rest of the church, really again pushed completely away from Catholicism. If it hadn't already been,
sure,
it had already been kind of cut off. Like, hey, there's the Catholics, and then there's the rest of the Christians,
right?
And that's the way it kind of worked. And then you find that everyone, they were kind of hiding in that realm, and then it's like, but wait a second, it's not over. Because then you're looking at the rest of the church scandals, and I mean, Southern Baptist Convention. I mean, there was big issues the last number of years about how they have hidden their abuse,
right?
And so they covered it up, they pushed it on, they acted like not a big deal. Everybody, don't look over here, don't look over here. No, we don't need an independent view of this. We don't need an independent count. No, right. We're going to handle this, and it's like, wait, you're going to handle it like you've handled it in the past, cover it up.
Right.
Not cool. We're not going to do it that way. So, and that went from, the largest church, Catholicism, into the largest local, United States, denomination, which is the SBC. And I know they don't call themselves a denomination. They call themselves a convention, blah, blah, blah. They're still...
Right.
Right. But so, the largest there, right? But it doesn't stop there.
Right.
And I think that, like when we look at it and say, like, whose fault it was that the church is no longer a central piece to conversation, and then we try to look at who to blame, we never look at ourselves. We never say, hey, you know what, like, we are bad, like, this was not good, we did some stuff and covered up some stuff and tried to ignore stuff, and that's our bad. We never said that. We're like, it's almost like we had a central Christian lawyer who was like, don't ever admit fault. Don't ever take the blame. Always deflect. It's almost like we were hearing somebody say, just plead the fifth. And we just passed it on still.
Yeah.
And then we were acting like, hey, everybody, you can trust us again. But what? Like, why would we? Why would this be a trusted institution now that you're all of a sudden, like, you didn't take any blame. You nothing was your fault. Everything was, and this was the boogeyman, was culture, was them, right? And even though we're all products of our culture,
right,
we still found ways in which we would always find a scapegoat, and culture became the scapegoat for everything. It's the culture's fault that the churches doesn't have its prominence anymore. It's the culture's fault that we are in this position. And it's like we put it on and I always say this, like everybody always says well, they say, like them, like those people, or, and it's like, but we are them.
Yeah.
But it's been eroded. And we've never wanted to ever take any blame on that. We never wanted to own it.
Yeah. which the other word coming to my mind as you're talking about that is responsibility.
Yeah.
Own up to your responsibility. And for those of you who've lasted the last 24 minutes, I just want to interject. This is the foundational groundwork that we lay.
Oh, yeah.
For the proposed topic of deity.
Right.
So when people take a hard stance of, I know the truth about the one true God. This is the riptide that has eroded in an age of information for people to say, yeah, I don't believe you. So, and we did an episode on truth, perceived truth, relative truth, perception, and that. And I would send people back to that episode and say, listen through the things that we talked about there as well. But we talked about in our last episode, moving from nothingness or a whole bunch of nothing. We just rambled on and on without any indication or direction.
Right. But we did tell people that was going to happen.
Right. We warned. Fair. Right. It was a fair warning.
Right.
Yeah. And then we moved into the idea started with, hey, let's talk about what we don't know about, which is like a never-ending list for us.
Yeah.
But then we landed on within that the idea of chaos. And from chaos, there was a brief. We didn't really do much with trauma. I mean, you addressed trauma in a little bit, but not
brought it in.
Yeah. And in that, where we came back to is that, if your life is in chaos and it's chaotic, I mean, like, there comes a time and a place where you have to look at an external power that's greater than you.
Right.
And we got into a little bit of 12-step speak and some things like that, but it really tripped in my mind a flag, because I get this question from people that I care about. I get this question on a couple different sides. There's people who are working through process and trying to figure out, what is my faith life really about? And how do I know what's really true? And there are, again, not only are we postmodernism, the $10 word of the day, postmodernity, not only is our culture in a postmodern status, but we have so much information that's available. So now the things that, again, pastors and teachers were the central core of how we got our information back in the 70s and the 80s and earlier as well. But then with all this information, I mean, with a flip of a switch and a quick search, you can find out about, the top 10 religions in the world. And so with all of these different religions, how do you know which religion has got it figured out? And back in the day, I mean, you could thump on your Bible, point to Jesus and say, Jesus is self-declared the way, the truth, and the life. No person comes to the Father but through him. I just wanted to be able to bridge the gap and be able to me, it's a funnel approach. You start broad and you funnel it down in steps to be able to come down to living out your spirituality, your faith life.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, when you talk about world religions, but you can also then bring in the idea and the concept of like running from the institution of religion. I mean, and that's where I think a lot of people, where they talk about why they run from that, is because they do see it has been a source of pain and hurt. And we're not just talking about Christianity either. I mean,
Right.
we're talking about other religions where it's places where, whether it's, the Eastern, section of the world, where religion has been used in a way to combat and beat people down.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just Christianity.
Yeah.
And so people, I believe that people are, when they're looking at this, they're saying, like, this is harmful. Why would I want to be in this system?
Sure.
At all, right? So then they become what we would say a nun. Like, I have no affiliation with any of this.
Not a nun with the Catholic Church.
Nah, not a nun, UN. A nun, NONE.
Right, yeah.
And so if, then you're saying, I just would rather not associate with this because of the, whether we even want to bring in that word again, chaos, right? Or trauma. There was so much that it has existed here, whether it was putting guilt on people, whether it was and everybody wants to claim guilt, right? I've heard, Jewish people like, oh, there's Jewish guilt, and that's different from everybody. No, because then there's also Christian guilt, there's Baptist guilt. I mean, everybody has their own section where they would say guilt has become a part of their system because somebody else has made it a part of their system.
Yeah.
And so when you're feeling guilt, it's like there's a source then that has told you why you should feel guilty. And sometimes it's also our conscience. I mean,
Sure.
But our conscience is built on, our upbringing, that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot that's built up in that system where you can also say, I mean, can you blame somebody for saying, I don't really like to be a part of the system? And I'm not saying that I'm a part of that. I'm just saying, like, I can understand where people come from. That are also saying, like, I have seen the system, I've been in the system, and now I don't want to be a part of the system. And so there's also the push away from, whether we would say religion or deity. And so I think that there's that a part of the conversation as well that we get into and say there's a section that we also have to consider. Is the nuns, like, no affiliation. I don't want to have any kind of system there.
Yeah, and that's where I would recommend for people who are having questions within themselves of, what really is true. And, the Catholic Church, this is a quote that I've used over the years, at least for 30 years. The Catholic Church says, give me your child till they're 5 and I'll have them for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. And so there are people who have been in religious institutions. They were carried there as babies mm-hmm. and don't know anything different.
Right.
And so, but then there are times in humans' lives where there's great reflection, and in that reflection they start questioning, and not necessarily out of rebellion, but just questioning the reality of what has been fed to them or what has been imposed on them.
Right.
And so it doesn't have to be connected to abuse. It doesn't have to be connected to harm. But when you take a look at the driving forces that often happen in churches, it's the system that has been just propagated, where there's a bunch of people, and I go back to talk about the Jewish people. I go back to when the Jews didn't have a king and they cried out to God for a king. Mm-hmm. And like all these other nations have a king. Well, God's response is, "I am your king. Mm-hmm. I am your," and I'm literally making this up as I go. Okay. But I have a tendency to come back to that's how God never intended for there to be a ruler leader.
Mm-hmm.
And how that works out, I have no idea. But God intended intended for a personal relationship and giving guidance and direction, and never intended. But now, so now what we're doing is we're looking for the best narcissist around to be able to lead these big churches.
Right.
Because it takes something like that to be able to do that. And I mean, because humanity is so harmful to itself anyway, that for a person to survive being in the lead position, they have to be calloused enough that they're not even paying attention to, all this stuff. And I'm just spinning this web where people are just going, hey, when are we going to talk about God? I mean, I think now we've moved into the conversation. You need to distinguish the difference between God, deity, and religious institution.
Yeah. But I mean, you brought in, a place where you have people who ask questions, right? And there's been, history of, years and years of people who have asked questions, and questions haven't been welcomed. They're like, yep, it's, the big statement, like, just have faith. And I'm sure every religious structure has their just have faith response, because there are things that people don't know. And instead of saying, I don't know, they're just like, hey, just believe it, right? Just hold on to the, to what I've said, and everything's going to be fine, right? And it's like, so what happens when you ask questions that somebody doesn't know, or you're listening to someone who thinks that they know all the answers, and you're like, but wait a second, because that answer doesn't correspond with the things that are my current reality. So then even somebody who's made up an answer, who has represented an authority structure, within that system, and they're saying, wait a second, this wasn't right. And so whether it was discouragement of any questions, or even that the questions that they did ask and somebody made up an answer, that ended up not being a good one, that this also has led people to say, why, and then they question deity. They question God, they question the existence of any, as we would call it, like a higher power out there, because questions can't be asked of deity.
Well, and oftentimes people will say, well, I've prayed about this, and I've never gotten an answer, and then you get the pastoral answer is, well, God answers 3 different ways. He answers yes. He answers, it's like a stop sign. Red is a hard no, and yellow is yield, or, well, you need to wait, or green is go, where it's like, yes, your prayers will be answered. And the thing is that that's why when people are coming and asking the question of what about God, what about church, I really come to a place where I'm like, you have to distinguish what question are you asking, because 2 are totally different. So we're not going to talk about religious institutions. We're going to get into higher power. And so I remember, this is back in the 70s and early 80s, Alcoholics Anonymous is, they don't even name the God, and your God could be a tree. And so, hey, for how that program worked, the vagueness mattered. and that's where I want to start.
Yeah.
Vagueness matters. And people are like, well, but you're not standing for anything. No, I stand for what I stand for by living it out what I believe.
Yeah.
But there are people on the journey who haven't had the time to figure out what they believe. Mm-hmm. And so we can start with higher power.
Yeah.
And understand, anybody sitting around a table now, there are people, atheists and agnostics, okay, who would be like, Nixay, no. But if you're not that person, by that definition, then just move into that we can we start at a place where we can agree that there is an existence of a power that is greater than us in our humanity, and that's where we start.
Yeah, and I think that you're going back to the 12-step structures of, and in every addiction group, right? Always, whether it's the 12 steps or some variation, they're always going back to, you have to recognize that there's something bigger than you. Now, you don't, and if somebody's coming to the table and saying, I've always been the biggest.
Sure.
So it starts and stops with me, right? And so then and if you still are living that way, like, you're not ready for step one.
Right.
Step one says my life is unmanageable, right? So do you come to a place and say, like, I can't make sense of it, like, and I've been trying to do this, and I've been trying to live, in a way that I'm my higher power, and it doesn't work, right? My life is unmanageable.
Right.
If you can't get there, you can't work on something greater than yourself.
Right.
Because that's like, I think, 2, 3, my life is unmanageable. I go through this every week, so, so when you're looking at this and you're saying, where does it start? Where it starts in recovery is saying, I have to understand there's an end to me. Right? That I don't have all the answers, that I can't make everything happen and orchestrate the things that I want in this world. That there's going to be something, then later outside of me. And and if you're coming from a place of, like, you've never grown up in a system that has given you a foundation that there's something outside of yourself, that's a hard place to start then.
Sure.
To say, my life is unmanageable and I need to seek a power greater than myself.
Yeah.
And so it's I think, a little bit, like, you have at least, if you were raised in America, the chances are that there was some point in time that you have intersected with religion.
Right.
And so there, and some people have even grown up and then they kind of fell away or just moved away, from a system like that. But there's been something in their past that when they come to a place of recovery, that they're also saying, I know that there's got to be something bigger than me.
Sure.
And that's, even a start of understanding higher power, understanding deity.
Well, and so if we can start with the vagueness of higher power, then I would also point in a direction that if you're asking questions, then we need to look in the mirror. Okay? Mm-hmm. And understand that we are spiritual beings.
Yeah.
And so first and foremost, we're spirit living in human bodies. And so if you can start there with there is a higher power and you are a spirit being, then it's a really short equation too. The two are meant to interact.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my premise. in the beginning. Get there. I think sometimes people who are trying to figure out who God is have lost themselves on the path of understanding who they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to figure out what's the right God, who's the right God, what God should I follow, how should I live out my life, according to what God rules, and and all of this stuff. But I think the really important next piece is you are a spirit being as much as you are a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Wholly so. And the two, the higher power and the spirit being, are meant to interact. That's why we're here. So, with that, then you move into, okay, so what do I call God? We oftentimes on this podcast speak of God in the form of deity. And so we don't name a God, and because if somewhere down the road an alien on the third planet over to the left listens to this podcast, I don't know what the alien believes, but what I do know is that we know what we believe because we work that out in our faith walk, in our faith life as we practice it. And it's totally cool for anyone to go through a time in life to say, I don't know if what I was taught was true. I think it's really good to question, were the things that you were taught even true? Or were the things that you were taught meant to feed the ego of the person who is teaching you? Or, how many times do I have to be told where you got your education? And here is then there's a motion of what just took place and what's being robbed from the institution, and that is an elitism. If I can't feel big about something in my real life, then I can feel big, or I can feel important about something in my spiritual life. Mm-hmm. And there's the replacement factor. This is what happens. And there are dangerous people in places of power and control who are feeding information that isn't true.
Yeah. Yeah, I've recently been, and we've talked about this prior to even starting Cut Daisies. I remember talking, but we talk about cult leaders, right?
Right, yeah.
And this is the concept of a cult leader. The cult leader is going to come in and say, I have the truth for you. And some are going to say, cult leader, you're crazy. You don't know what you're saying. Like, it's not the truth. And you're going to have some people who are like, oh, I'm connecting with this. I'm connecting with the truth that you're speaking. And so now I want to follow you.
Well,
right?
A true cult leader isn't ever going to tell you what you have to believe. A true cult leader is going to put a little salt in your oats and make you thirsty for what you want to believe.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying?
For sure.
The guise of the cult leader is to create a following without the following really knowing what the true intent is. Speaking from personal experience.
But I think it was the new Macs. They have Discovery built in there, so I never know which one it's coming from. But there's a whole cult leader, one that's out there. We started what's his name, Manson. And the Manson family stuff. And, it just so happened that the Manson family, one of the ladies in the group was just released from prison after 53 years or something that she's been in there. And so she served 53 years of a life sentence. Right. And, but there was something with Manson that people were like, oh, Like there's something to that. I mean, and then you're kind of led down a path
Right.
of like, hey, this started off, communal. It started off, like we're gonna share, we're gonna
All you need is love.
right, lots of
La,
love.
da, 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 da.
And then there was, as you mentioned, but Manson, if he would have revealed to his followers early on his intention, chances are people would have jumped out early. But it was like getting to this place where it was like, oh, and now let's start a race war. Now let's do some killings that are going to be, that we're going to throw in some racially motivated things so that we can eventually get to a place where people are going to, everybody's going to be, fighting one another.
Yeah.
Like if you started with that concept, people are going to be like, no, like that's not for me. Like I'm out.
Right.
That's not the peace, love, and
Right.
hippie stuff that we wanted.
Right.
And so that it's just like that, right? So you're bringing in a concept and you're saying, this is our perspective. This is our view. And and let's salt the oats a little bit to get you to understand your felt need right now.
Yeah.
And I'm going to speak a little bit of that truth, but then I'm also going to weave in a whole bunch of other stuff.
Right.
So you look at all the other cult leaders that are on that, Heaven's Gate, has, coming from a version of Christianity, but a whole bunch of other weird stuff.
Yep.
And then it's like, we're going to weave this in. And then eventually, hey, let's drink the Kool-Aid together because we need to go and jump on a comet.
I like grape.
Me too. I think that's why we're together.
There you go. There you go.
No, I mean, so that's, like it's these concepts that are brought in. You're like, here's a felt need, right? Speaking to spirit, speaking to a spiritual need or whatever it might be, and then kind of weaving in a whole bunch of other stuff that, ends up being toxic.
And then, even though I know we bounced back and forth between religion and deity, but one of the things that religion does do concerning representing deity is it creates structure. And when people find their lives are chaotic and out of control, it's the structure that makes things feel more in line or more, I want to use the word continuity. It gives their life a feeling of continuity. And so whether that's through a daily practice of, I'm going to use prayers / meditation synonymously in regards to, whether that's a daily practice. For some people, a weekly practice of a gathering, it allows for that continuity.
Yeah.
And so then, we just, and again, I think we started pre-taping and you and I said we could talk about this for hours.
Right.
And
because there's lots of different veins too.
So many veins in this spirit being. And, so, I mean, we're literally coming up on having talked for about an hour. And I mean, it's just a scratch.
Yeah.
But if people can take away from this and just spend some time thinking about, if you have a question about the religious institution that you're a part of, or maybe you're not a part of, if you have been a part of a religious institution and then you're not going to a local gathering of community, just understand that where I personally come from, I'm not going to speak for you. Okay, where I come from, I can be okay with that. And people are like, what? No, I can. I can be okay with that because who I trust, it's not that I trust you. I trust the deity. And so this takes me to the next part, that even though someone talks about God, doesn't mean that there has been a transition in themselves to recognize that God is really God.
Right.
And where, and this may seem like, well, duh, Koble, kind of moment. But in my reality, I came to a place recently, I mean, like in the last, I'd say 7 or 8 years, which when you look at my analog body, I mean, that's very recent.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, I don't want to serve a God that I can explain. I don't want to worship a God that I understand. Because if I can understand it, that's a really small God.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're at a place where you're like, yeah, I'm just struggling with these questions within me, I would say, so hang out with Deity. Like, purposefully hang out with Deity. You are a spirit being. Hang out with Deity. Let Deity inform you. I'm trusting Deity. Now, there are people listening to this podcast who'd be like, shame on you, Koble, for not naming Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. I didn't say that I don't believe that.
Right.
That's not, I'm not saying that I don't believe that.
Right.
I'm saying there are people who aren't there yet.
Right.
And I can trust that God is going to work in them to bring them to that place. And I don't have to impose that on them. Mm-hmm. They're like, well, if you don't mention it, it can't be a part of the conversation. I'm like, we're not done.
Right. And I mean, and this is where we're saying conversation. And conversation doesn't happen once. It happens in relationship, and it happens over the course, right? The course of journeys. And I think that's where, I mean, I think we mentioned on the podcast, before, but we talk about it, where we deconstruct. I mean, and it's a buzzword. It's been a hot topic. People have talked about it amongst Christianity, but I think deconstruction can happen in any faith journey. And deconstruction says I've been built up this way. And it can happen whatever, like I said. Any faith structure, you're going to say, is there a certain point when you're going to start questioning the structure? You're going to question the things that you have been taught or whatever. And it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you're going to question it and say, all right, let's look at this. Let's hold on to the things that are true and let's reject the things that are not.
So, and broken down into a parable or just a story, if you have a room and there's one place for a light bulb and the light bulb goes out, what do you have to do? You can either live in the room in the dark or you can change the light bulb. Mm-hmm. When you go to change the light bulb, then there's a process of decision. Do you want cool light? Do you want warm light? Mm-hmm. Do you want an LED? Incandescent?
Right.
Fluorescent.
Fluorescent, yeah.
I mean, and so then there's decisions. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ruin it for the purists out there. The reality is there's lots of choices. But you have to go through a process of what does the room need, mm-hmm. and how do you want to experience that?
Right.
And I will stand on my foundation. Mm-hmm. I trust Deity to inform me of how that's going to be the best in my situation.
Yeah, because the dangers then that occur is somebody who is a strict, and I'll use the word like fundamentalist, right? Because there's a fundamental way that they see the world, and they say everybody needs to follow this path.
Or what happens.
Right. Or you're condemned, right? You're lost. You're
Going to spend eternity in
Right.
the depths of hell.
Right.
Yes.
So I mean, there's lots of ways that that has been put across, right? But so there is only one journey, and it's the one that I was on, or am on, or whatever, right?
I figured out the right set of rules.
Yeah.
That everyone needs to follow.
Yeah. And if you just do it like me, then the world will be a better place. Right? I mean, and that's why we call it fundamental, right? Because they're saying this is fundamentally how it goes.
Right.
There is no other way. And I think when you start to be able to speak in those definite terms, that's the way that you're going to see the world too. Mm-hmm. And the world turns into, this is the way that you have to do it. Democracy or capitalism or, whatever, you pick it, but everything starts to turn into a fundamental system. Mm-hmm. And if you're not doing it this way or seeing it this way, then you're wrong, and you're also then lost. I mean, you can go through the rest of those. And that's where I think why when you hear somebody who has deconstructed, has gone through their faith and has stripped things back or stripped things down, and people look at them and say, you're lost, you're condemned, you're on the road to hell.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're not following the path. They're not following the system. And the system's already there. Why aren't you following it?
Right.
And instead of trusting deity, instead of trusting that there is something bigger at play, they're saying the path is the way, right? We've made the path deity. We've made this be the only system, the only higher power, right, that can ever possibly be known.
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of danger lies. Is we've made things, and we've made certainty our king. We've made certainty our deity.
Right.
And we say, you know what? There is no mystery. It's all already there. And it's like, whoa. And that goes back to where you said, then what happens? Deity becomes us.
Right.
Like it's our reflection.
And I personally can see that in my own life, where there was the work that God was doing in me mm-hmm. to be able to strip away my own godness. Mm-hmm. And there was a part of just in life. And so then, does the religious institution, is it said in a way that it is deity, mm-hmm. Or is it the practices of any said denomination, is that, and so, when I picked this up from Richard Rohr, he talks about the Bible as the sacred texts. And we've also mentioned that, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, Jewish people study to this day. But how they study it is different than how it's proclaimed and taught mm-hmm. in evangelicalism and even in the new evangelicals. And people are like, well, what's the distinguish? I mean, I personally enjoy... and I'll do the same thing, and people chuckle when I get to it, but I enjoy music. That's as bland and vague as higher power. Mm-hmm. I enjoy rock and roll music. I enjoy folk music. I enjoy worship music. Mm-hmm. But it's all music.
Right.
And I'm not condemned for liking Tom Petty. Mm-hmm. And I am also, this is where then we get into the place of, what is your faith in? Is your faith in your works?
Yeah.
In what you bring to the table, what you believe? Mm-hmm. Or is your faith in deity? And so I move into a place out of practice that if I can trust deity with my afterlife, how can I not trust deity with my present life? Mm-hmm. That's really like, there's something there that matters in my boiling down how to live out a faith life or a spiritual life.
Yeah, because I think what it brings me to in the last section you just talked about was variety, right? I mean, and over the course of history, I mean, you brought up Judaism, right? Yeah. There were 12 tribes of Israel, right?
There were.
And each tribe had a different, things that they were either, like the priest or Levite,
sure.
So there was a section that everybody, and some of those then had their own, teachers, rabbis that were a section of this particular house. I mean, and so those rabbis would teach, and sometimes in different ways.
Right.
Now, I don't know they didn't really, nobody was like, well, I'm going to contradict that one. But there were probably some teachers over time that were then speaking contradictory terms. So now, over that course, now there of course would be people in Judaism would say, well, we don't really like that section. Like they're going to do their thing, but they're there.
Right.
Now, we look at...
Much like the Franciscans to the Catholic Church.
Exactly where I was going to go
really?
to, right?
Okay.
It's like,
all right, yeah.
So then you look at Catholicism, and there's the Augustinians, there's the Franciscans. There's a whole ton of different versions.
Yeah, I didn't even know this until,
right.
Again, probably 5 to 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you get a whole bunch of different, and the Augustinians are different from the Franciscans, and the Franciscans are different from the, right now I'm trying to figure out. There's a whole bunch of them.
Okay.
But when you're looking at it, you're saying, so would they say, no, I'm not Catholic? No, they would say, I'm Catholic. Catholic can be both understood as universal or Roman Catholic, or there's also a free Catholic that's not associated with a pope or whatever. But there, across the board, we're saying there's people that are on a journey that their segment or their piece is going to look different. Now we can say, I don't like Catholics. Okay. Does that mean that Catholics don't exist? We're in the Lutheran vein, right? And we would say, some people are like, oh, I don't like the way that the Free Church does their altar calls because then they're making salvation a choice. Okay, does that mean that they cease to exist because we don't like it?
Right.
No, you're not Christian anymore. And some people have then done that, right? Like, you're not this anymore because you do this. But there's variation.
Yeah.
Within everything. And we can either say, I'm going to push back completely against anything that variates from my way, right? Or we can say, I know that they exist, and I know that there's people out there that are trying to practice in a different way than me.
Yeah.
I'm okay. I'm okay with it, and I trust God, deity. I trust that there's something bigger that's at play with them too.
Yeah.
And they're going to be on their journey just like I'm on mine.
Yeah.
And why can't we be okay with it?
Well, so then move to outrage.
Mm-hmm.
And what is within people that when they're faced with variety, that it has moved them into outrage.
Right.
I mean, I think that ends up, and I think only listeners will be able to take time of reflection, time of meditation.
Right.
But you have to ask yourself the question, what moves you into being outraged by, in my head, like where my mind went was a lot of people are afraid of Muslims. And they're afraid that religious order, well, what makes them angry about them not believing in the way? Well, it's fear, right?
Yeah. And there's been a lot of fear that's been perpetuated.
Correct. And
Right.
that was my point,
Yeah.
is that one of the most gracious individuals I've ever known in my life was Muslim. He was not a militant, I mean, you know what I'm saying? So
Right.
that's where I'm going with that is, it's fear of terrorism, but not all terrorists are Muslims. And, and so it cracks me up at the free store next door. It cracks me up that when people give donations and they're giving Christmas decorations.
Right.
It's like, really?
Yeah.
You're giving Christmas decorations?
Yeah, and they
so we're
usually say, Tabor, do you want these?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, and for a lot, yeah, I mean, but I hear that's so then as we're kind of journeying along, we also need to, I mean, and I understand, like, there's things that come up that I wouldn't say I mean, there's some really like goofy out there concepts and ideas. Like, I'm not saying like, hey, let's just, absorb everything and say, oh, like it's all like, I don't think everything is good, but it's still part of the journey for some people. Right. I mean, so they're going through and trying to understand deity and as spiritual beings, how are they understanding the world around them? And there's going to be people who come up with silly things, and I'm going to call it silly, but I mean, it's like there's going to be things that you're looking at it and from your perspective, and from my perspective, I'd still say, I mean, that's silly. Like, it seems silly to me. But I'd also say I'd like to ask them about it. Like, I don't understand it.
So when we were driving to church on Easter Sunday,
Yeah.
we saw a really big, like 6-foot Easter bunny in front of one of the churches that we drive by.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Like, how, like, you're going to promote your church with an Easter bunny on Easter. I don't get that. Mm-hmm. I don't equate Easter to the Easter bunny.
To a bunny, yeah.
The bunny.
The bunny.
The bunny.
Ooh, I love the bunny.
Little veggie tales right there for you.
Uh-huh.
But I and I would just move into that's classic new evangelicalism. And what people, but yeah. Wow.
So to me, and I think that we've landed here before, is that where I've come to and where I land and where I expect to reside for the rest of my time in as a spiritual being is embracing, understanding mystery. Like, are there things that I don't understand? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Do I understand deity completely? No way.
Right.
And I would still say anybody who says that they do, I think that there's some problems.
Yeah.
And if you're saying I understand deity completely in everything, then I believe that you've made yourself deity.
Right.
And then you need to be careful.
Yeah.
And so that's where I've always come back to now, even went through large periods of time of questioning, doubts, and said, for my sake and my journey, I fully need to embrace mystery.
Yeah.
Because I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know everything. And for me to expect to would be harmful for me. And that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, and what I would say to people who are asking questions, then I would just invite you to, if you're listening, if you're driving in a car, don't do this. But if you aren't driving in a car, just throw your arms out wide and embrace discovery. And to me, that's the part that I have truly enjoyed about being a spirit being, is that discovery is a daily part of life. And so, and you know, I got stories for days on how deity has shown up and been and revealed its realness in my life. And so I can't not believe. And I think that the spiritual life that I'm living looks so different. It looks so different than what I was raised in. And that doesn't make it wrong. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't make the journey nullified.
Right.
And maybe that's another thing. Give yourself permission as a listener that anything that you have gone through and experienced, good and bad, is purposefully being used on your discovery journey. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah. And I would, just to be able to caution, the listener as well, to try to understand, as we talk about, seek to understand before being understood. Yeah. So if there's somebody that's on a journey, understanding as a spiritual being, trying to understand how the world works in this place under a higher power, to try to understand it before condemning.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and I think that we've already talked about, that this is, it should be a place that should be, I think, natural. Like, yeah, people are different. And so if your first notion is to say, hey, let's condemn before we even understand it, then reverse it and say, I want to understand. Who can I ask? Who can I sit down with?
Yeah. Yeah. What moves you into conversation?
Right.
And in that conversation that you can actually connect with that person's story. Mm-hmm. Just recently we had a house guest who was in the States from Hong Kong, and after not really interacting for over 6 years, at some point you just have to ask the question, hey, what's been going on in your life? And that's not a bad question, whether it's been 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. Just, hey, what's going on? And find out what's going on. And it's so quintessential. Don't see your job concerning truth as that you need to fix everyone to know the truth. Mm-hmm. And more than likely, based on that, mercies and grace are magnets for people who are longing for it. Mm-hmm. And so when you're able to show mercy and grace, people see that because it is so abstractly different than what they see in other people.
Right.
And so how can you act merciful? How can you act graceful? And I throw into, even within relationship of partnership, that, it's the times when you're doing the things that you don't want to do. That's when you're showing love. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It just is. So anyway, well, I think that's it.
We scratch. That's what it is.
We scratch?
It's the surface.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. There's so much, and as we mentioned, there's so many veins to this, and there's so many, different routes you can take the conversation when you're dealing with deity, higher power, that and religion. I mean, when that gets thrown in the mix, there's so much that's a part of this.
Yeah.
And that's why when you're looking at a journey, right, and your life as a spiritual journey, as a spiritual being is a journey.
Yeah.
And that means like we're going to have ebbs and flows. We're going to have moments that we're like, hey, this is good. And there's going to be times when you're like, this, I don't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And, somebody, like I don't know which direction is up or down or left or right or north or south or any of that. Right? I mean, and so in those places, give yourself grace and saying, all right, every day is a new day.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how to be able to embrace things bigger than ourselves.
Yeah. I like it. Well, hopefully that was a help. And, hopefully for others, that you're okay and you've navigated through the vagueness of this conversation.
Right. Muddy. We just like to muddy the waters.
Go listen to Derek Webb.
There it is.
If you got any other questions, feel free to email us, send us a little note, or you can reply in the comments section. But we'd love to hear from you, and obviously, where we're at, 9 follows 8, and 10 follows 9. So we got a little march going on here.
We do. Here we go.
All right.